Hello there, what's up? With the expected arrival of a new chapter of Replay, several things are revealed to us, being one of the ones that interested me the most, a direct explanation of the role and nature of the Sin bosses. Previously we could assume that these were simply native beings, being some kind of apex predator, as one of the multiple products of the strange nature of these planets, but in fact it is the opposite case. These beings are invasive species that deformed the planets in which they reside to the point of making them unrecognizable and making them a reflection of their capabilities and influences. This in the case of Alkali, despite not seeing the whole picture, is very explicit, showing us a dystopian and industrialized world with strong social divisions, all this because of the arrival and influence of Avigus, the boss of greed. Now, with all this information, I think it would be interesting to revisit the previous chapters and see the effects and influences of the previous bosses in their respective worlds. So, with nothing more to say, let's get started. The case of Gelat is quite symbolic, so to speak. In most levels of the world we don't see much potential lore, although we can take one thing for granted, the cold. In the tundra we can see directly how snowstorms have affected the ecosystem of the area, killing most of the creatures or causing them to isolate themselves in other places. We could see the theme of cold as a symbol of sloth, representing the absence of movement, isolation, or hibernation, when some animals, due to the low temperatures of the winter season, sleep the whole season, in order to stay alive until spring. But before moving on to another planet, we must talk about the Temple of Silence. This area is quite unique both for its atmosphere and for the beings that inhabit it. This place could be considered an area of worship to Lether, since it is the last type of level before reaching him. Although it could also be a temple built by a civilization that succumbed to the unforgiving cold, as the statues that decorate the temple look nothing like the boss of the Sin of Sloth. Moving on to Corona, here we can see a greater symbolism of sin, in this case pride or vanity. To start with the most obvious, there would be the reflex level, centered on mirrors, a clear symbol of vanity, not to mention the NPC that Carl encounters. Then there would be Patzer, the chess level. This is a game that tests the intellect of each player, making them fight each other. Although it sounds a bit far-fetched, we could also link it to the theme of the world if we understand this game not only as a duel of intellects but also of egos. Leaving the symbolic aspect to look at more explicit elements, there would be the power plant, in which humanoid creatures are constantly executed in a terrible way. These could be beings that tried to rise up against Exaltan, being harshly repressed. The latter, added to the presence of his own face carved on the platforms in his battle scenario, could present us with the image of a beast that established a regime around his person, in which he cruelly punishes any force that attempts against his ego. Amorphous is by far the planet I least expected to find things with, but it ends up being, in my opinion, one of the ones with the most interesting background. The sin of this world being envy, I would first like to highlight the strong aquatic theme of the world and, above all, how Idea is a creature adapted to the deep sea. By this we can assume that the major effects on the planet from Idea's influence is the predominance of aquatic creatures. This can be seen with elements such as the fact that all the enemies of the planet are either aquatic beings, or are derived from them. There are also the remains of a completely abandoned terrestrial civilization with water everywhere. But, above all, being the most explicit element, the creatures tied to stones in the underwater levels. These, apart from having a reddish or pinkish color that contrasts with the environment, seem to have wings. Indeed, they are the only creatures in the world not to have some aquatic feature. Considering that Yosal used to live here, and how he mentions that his family might be dead, maybe we already know what really happened to them. Oh yeah, let's also not forget Idea's ability to become an exact copy of its opponent. Finally, Looking at Tempest, we can highlight two elements in relation to lust. First, the most obvious, would be the Salak hatchlings. These creatures are present in the three types of levels of the planet, presenting in top and swamp adaptations to these environments, while in the combat against Salak and in fog, which is also another case of remains of an extinct civilization, they seem to be pure offspring of Salak. In any case, these beings have exterminated all the native fauna, ignoring the appearance of Godzilla monsters, taking their place and reproducing rampantly, as can be seen in top. Already as a secondary detail would be the tree of syringes of swamp, which would symbolize the consumption of drugs. Remember that lust is not only related to sex or reproduction, but to pleasure itself. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. I know that in some worlds I haven't mentioned some levels, since I didn't really see anything to associate them with the theme of their world. I also have to say that you should not consider this video as something 100% canonical, since at the end of the day this is just a theory in which I have probably overanalyzed some things. Anyway, I would like to read your opinions and theories, so do not hesitate to comment, always with respect ahead. This has been
Guardula que mágico.
Have a nice day, afternoon, and evening.